Hello, everybody. I'll be sharing with you the upcoming Sunday school lesson for September the 11th for adults. It comes from the book of Genesis, chapter 25. Your lesson text is verses 19 to 34. And the title is God Chooses the Younger Twin. Twins. We've had a number of twins grow up in our church since I've been pastor. There were the Troll twins, the sons of Keith and Sonia, whose names were Jordan and Stephen. We've also had the Askew twins, the daughters of John and Janet, and the daughters named Sarah and Lisa. Now, I personally never had much trouble telling Jordan and Stephen apart. They looked a bit different, and of course, they had different personalities. But for me, it was more difficult telling Lisa and Sarah apart, particularly when they were much younger. Biological identical twins come from the same egg. Fraternal twins come from two different eggs. And typically, identical twins look more alike than fraternal twins, yet all twins have different fingerprints. Even twins are uniquely different. Today's lesson is about twins, Esau and Jacob. It's an interesting story from the human physiological viewpoint, but to me it's an even more interesting story from the social, environmental, family point of view. Although they were fraternal twins, even identical twins become different because of their environment, their culture, their life experiences, and life choices. Esau and Jacob would end up making some supremely different life choices. Verse 19b tells us that Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac was the miracle child. As Father Abraham was 100 years old and his wife, Sarah, was 90 years old, truly a miracle child. Abraham and Sarah had waited a long, long time for this child to be born, and Sarah would not birth another. Interestingly, and you can find this in chapter 25, verses 1-2, after the death of Sarah, Abraham would marry a much younger woman named Keturah, and Keturah would bear Abraham 6 more children. Think about that. Verse 20 tells us that Isaac was 40 years old when he got married. His wife was named Rebekah. Now theirs is an interesting love story, certainly worth the reading. It's in chapter 24. While their love was strong, Rebekah did not easily become pregnant. They thought she might be barren, just as Isaac's parents had thought they were barren. But 20 years into the marriage, Rebekah becomes pregnant and would birth twins, Esau, the older, and Jacob, the younger. Now I use the words older and younger in the context that there was a few minutes difference in their ages. Esau was ruddy in appearance, meaning he had reddish hair. One translation says that he was so hairy it was as if he had a fur coat. Esau would forever be identified with the land of Edom, which also means reddish. Jacob would come out of his mother's womb holding on to Esau's heel. Verse 22 says that the brothers had been struggling within the womb. Therefore, the name Jacob means heel grabber and also deceiver, which would prove to be true in his life. The other significant part of their birth was the prophecy, where God told Rebekah, verse 23, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples will come from you and be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Now, we are not told whether Rebekah shared this prophecy with her husband. All we are told is that, and we find this in verse 28, is that Isaac loved Esau and Rebekah loved Jacob. Both parents had their favorites, and it seems to me that that is never a good thing. Esau, the father's favorite, was more of the outdoorsman, a great hunter, and Isaac loved his son's cooked game. Now, Jacob was less of an outdoorsman. He generally stayed closer to home, was closer to his mother. Those traits and lifestyles would play prominently in verses 27 to 34. You might want to read those, verses 27 to 34, when Jacob takes advantage of his brother. And here's how it happened. And apparently it was something that Jacob had been scheming to take advantage of his brother one day. Remember, deceiver, schemer. Esau and Jacob were now either in their teens or young adults. Esau, quote, came in from the field exhausted. Now, maybe he had been hunting, maybe he had been ranching or farming, but he was very, very hungry. He was famished. Now, Jacob had been cooking stew. And this stew, it says, had a reddish texture. So you see that everything that's involved with Esau's life seems to have this reddish texture. Apparently, the aroma was so tantalizing, it was overpowering to Esau. He desperately wanted Jacob to give him that stew to eat. And it was in his weakness that Jacob took advantage of his brother. Jacob demanded that in exchange for the stew, Esau must sell his birthright. It seems that the stew was the cost of the trade. Esau gladly made this trade because he cared little for his birthright, which meant that he gave up his special inheritance rights as the older or elder son. Typically, the oldest son received a, quote, double portion, or 2/3 of the inheritance, and the younger received a lesser amount, 1/3, which is certainly different than the 50-50 distribution that typically happens in American culture with 2 children. Verse 34 says that, quote, Esau despised his birthright. But it's also true that Esau despised his brother who had deceived him, and 40 years later, this deception would be greatly multiplied to the point that Esau vowed to kill his brother. Bad stuff coming. The lesson title is God Chooses the Younger Twin. So let me pose 5 questions for you. And if you are teachers, you might want to maybe write down these 5 questions and actually address them with your class. First question is this. Since Esau and Jacob were twins born the same day, was it right for their inheritances to be different? Secondly, is sibling rivalry more intensified among twins than for non-twin siblings? The third question is, did God's prophecy to Rebekah that the younger would become more powerful and influential justify in some way Jacob's actions? Number 4, is it ever right for parents to have preferences or favorites when it comes to their children? And then the 5th question is that, do you ever think that God has chosen you? And if yes, in what ways has God chosen you? How do you live out your own God-given prophecy or calling? God bless, and hopefully you'll have a great week, and look forward to seeing many of you Sunday. Take care.